We're going to get back on schedule, and this panel is going to do it, so we're going to shorten it to an hour. We're going to leave some time at the end, within the hour, for anybody who has questions, and if you don't have questions, then maybe it'll only go 55 minutes or 50 minutes, so that will be up to you. This panel needs no introduction, so there will be no introduction. We met everybody. We met everyone yesterday. We know everyone well, and let's just get right to the action, shall we? Okay, so I'm going to start with Jerrod. Thank you for being here, Jerrod. You've got a very good sense of humor. You're a good sport. Yesterday, Michael Steele said that any Republican who's going to hope to beat Donald Trump in the presidential primary next year, this coming cycle, is going to have to go toe-to-toe and call him out and be the bully that Donald Trump is. Who in the potential field do you think is most likely and least likely to do that? And first of all, do you agree with that analysis, and who in the field is most and least likely to do it?
So there's a part of me that agrees with it. However, when Donald Trump announces tonight, so a very timely conversation, a couple of fundamental things will still be true from the last time. So much has changed, and yet nothing has changed in the Republican primary. Donald Trump will set the rules of the Republican primary. And what I mean by that is, as this wasn't expected, but this is what he did. He drove the coverage every day. He drove what people were talking about. He drove what the media was talking about. He drove what the other candidates were talking about. He forced the other candidates to try to make up funny nicknames about him after he had done it to them for months and months and months. And so Donald Trump will set the rules. I don't necessarily disagree with what Michael said, and I was agreeing with him when he said it yesterday, but then I thought, the more I think about it, I don't know that that's a winning strategy, because are you just playing by Donald Trump's rules? And so I think, he has massive advantages when he goes into this. He is both the ultimate insider and now the ultimate outsider. He's the former president of the United States, but yet he'll be running as the ultimate outsider in the Republican primary. So I think that if anyone is able to challenge Trump, they are going to have to come up with a different set of rules, because the other fundamental truth, which was the case last time, which will be the case this time, a crowded field helps Donald Trump, and as long as it is a crowded field, that plays to his benefit. And I don't know, there's basically going to be two lanes. There's going to be the Donald Trump lane, and there's going to be the not Donald Trump lane. And so I think the person that could be successful, and I don't know that anyone's going to be, is that it can block out everybody else and be that final person standing against Donald Trump. But the only way they're going to do that is to not play by Donald Trump's rules.
Okay, thank you. Michael Steele. So we're starting with Donald Trump because obviously Donald Trump is making a big announcement this evening, and he's going to drive the news. He's driving the news already. If you were running against Donald Trump, Michael Steele, what would the argument, other than you're crazy, but what would on policy grounds, is there an argument against Donald Trump, or on policy grounds, is he the perfect fit for today's Republican Party? And if so, what's the policy ground? And if not, is it just going to be we need to return to normal?
I think a policy argument against Trump would be a difficult one inside the GOP, because a significant portion of Republicans agree with a lot of the policy positions that the Trump administration took, whether it was redefining relationships within our NATO family, whether it was standing up against China and putting a light on that relationship that the U.S. has with China. Certainly, a lot of us scratched our head around, Trump is consistent in his view on the use of and the value of tariffs, which are typically outside of a policy view that a lot of Republicans have, but a lot of Republicans suddenly went, oh, okay, guess tariffs aren't bad, and so aligned themselves accordingly. So I think it's on a policy level, it's going to be very hard to sort of create that separation with Trump. I think where you start to draw the line, and this goes to Jerrod's point, and just to further clarify, when I say, going toe-to-toe with Trump, it doesn't mean, as Marco Rubio tried and spectacularly failed at, being a bully in that sense. It means calling out the illiberal behavior of the man, and because Donald Trump is fixated on one thing, Donald Trump, right? So for him, it's about recasting again the 2020 election cycle. I'm still not convinced the announcement tonight is going to be a presidential announcement, because he only said it was very, 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 very probably what he was going to announce. So I'm not sure that's what it is.
A new line of Trump steak knives.
Yeah, I knew.
So I think there's going to be a clear line of delineation amongst Republicans when it comes to going after Trump on policy, where a lot of Republicans align themselves with that policy, versus going after Donald Trump on illiberal behavior, anti-institutions, constitutional norms and principles, which I think, you can go. So the question is, do you want to relive all that crazy just to get to, a strong policy against China? And I think the argument could be made, and the answer would probably be no. We don't want to do that. And if you have a candidate that's able to effectively make that case, and I'm not convinced DeSantis is the one who can do that for a host of reasons. I think someone like a Mike Pence could. I think someone, like a Chris Christie could. But I think it's going to be whether or not those individuals find that lane successfully and stick with it, and just know you're not trying to convince people that you're necessarily better than Trump. What you're trying to convince them is you're the best thing that can help the party move forward and good for the country, and that we did our dance with Trump, there's no need to do that again. And that's going to be hard, because it's going to require people to, individuals to really kind of push back when he starts the name calling and the sort of trite behavior. And it's going to be hard for them to withstand getting sucked into that in some kind of way where they either look weak or somehow compliant with it.
Jonathan, I know everybody here knows this already, but Jonathan broke a story today that he was talking about last night at dinner that he really couldn't tell us about, but it was President Biden calling Nancy Pelosi and asking her to stay on. And I noticed in your copy, you said you referenced the fact that it might be the last 2 years for both Pelosi and Joe Biden. And I'm curious if that was something that you were predicting, or if it was something that you were just that you just. The question Democrats are going to start asking here pretty soon is, will the president actually follow through? Will the president actually follow through and run? And is the fact that Trump's running, does that actually make it more likely, as his aides have said?
It's about time we got to the "is Biden going to run" part of the program. My colleague Alex Burns and I did this book that came out earlier in the year, and we did a fun book tour over the summer. And literally every audience that we spoke to asked some version of two questions: is Trump going to run again? Is Biden going to run again? So it's always fun when that moment comes up. And it's never been more ripe, Steve, as you point out, because we are a mere hours away from the Mar-a-Lago unveiling of Trump 3.0. He's back, and He is, I think, well tanned and ready to go. He's in Florida. He has to be well tanned. So, look, I think Biden, the great thing about Joe Biden, not unlike Donald Trump, is if you want to know what they think, just stick around long enough and they'll tell you, right? And what people will tell you about Biden is that what he says in public is basically what he says in private, but with fewer F-bombs. Biden's got kind of a salty mouth, but he's very careful about not saying that in public. And so Biden has been pretty open in interviews, like twice, maybe three times as I can recall, where he effectively says if Trump runs again, it's more likely that he will run again. I think Trump getting in the race, I think really is going to lure Biden to get closer to the starting line. I don't think it's a done deal that Biden's definitely going to run. I do think that Trump getting in makes this a lot more significant for him. I think Biden, and you mentioned Pelosi, I think they view themselves as bulwarks against this Trumpian threat to American democracy. And no hyperbole, as Joe Biden would say. Like, they actually believe that. And so I think Biden, there's probably some ambition and vanity at work. They're politicians as well. Let's not be totally naive. But I think Biden believes that. And I think if Biden believes he's healthy and his family's okay, I think he will move toward a reelection if Trump is serious about running. What I find really intriguing, Steve, is the scenarios that could play out in 2023. I think 2023 could be an extraordinarily fascinating year. The year before the presidential is always kind of full of shadow boxing. And it's fun for junkies, but most American civilians don't follow it too closely. Boy, I think 23 could be incredibly interesting on both sides because you've got this prolonged game of chicken between these two 80-year-old politicians, Trump and Biden. And Trump we think is going to get in the race tonight, but what happens if he gets indicted at once or even twice? What happens if it's so clear that he's weak and he finds some face-saving reason to get out of the race next year? What does that do to Biden? Has Biden already announced? Does Biden then reconsider? Or is this all just sort of like Aaron Sorkin-like fantasy and they're both going to run like we're on track for the Biden-Trump rematch? I think it's probably somewhere in between right now. But there's no question that Trump getting in, I think, puts Biden one solid step closer, Steve, to running.
So JoDee, you're from Iowa. Did everybody know JoDee's from Iowa? Everybody also knows that Iowa is where the presidential campaigns kick off, where the first nominating caucus.
It's near Nebraska, I think, Steve.
Right next to Nebraska, very near Nebraska. But there's been some question about Iowa's future, certainly in the Democratic process. What do you think is going to happen with the Iowa caucus? Is there going to be an Iowa caucus? And if Biden didn't run, what would be the likelihood that Iowa would have a meaningful role going forward? Or do you think we're just going to be off to South Carolina and Nevada and New Hampshire?
How many questions did you just ask me?
It's really just one. Iowa. Tell us Iowa.
For those of you who don't know, Steve is from Nebraska. So I guess I was trying to figure out why I'm sitting next to Steve. I was worried I was going to have to go first, but now I know Nebraska, Iowa. I got it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, a couple things. I think it's going to be difficult for Iowa to keep the caucuses. If they're able to keep them for one more round, because Biden is running, I think it's going to be hard beyond that. And I think it primarily is this last go-round was a bit of a counting and math debacle. And it's hard to come back from that. And there were already a lot of folks questioning it. What has kept Iowa in the mix, and I almost think about the set of states that goes early, not just Iowa, New Hampshire, but the four, kind of a set of states, is that it's hard to figure out where else would it go, and is it a set of states, or does it just become a giant national primary? And I think that's really the question. And what I would argue as somebody who has worked on races up and down the ballot and has spent time in caucus rooms and has spent time, a long time ago dialing on rotary phones, and now I've been in politics long enough where I just get to text people. We call the app Hustle, and we just get to text people. And I think it is a mistake for our democracy not to have a way to have those more personal one-on-one conversations. And, you know, the Iowa State Fair, they have the soapbox you have to get on, and you talk to folks, and folks put corn kernels in if they liked you as a candidate or not, you know, and they have all these kinds of things going on. But I would hate to think that the way we get to our presidential nominee is through social media and green rooms. That pains me. That pains me as a Democrat and as somebody, you know, who I was sharing this story earlier with someone, but, you know, I cut my teeth in a small town in Iowa, not doing what I understood to be politics, but working in my community. Economic development, helping the school. My family helped start a church in my town. Like, so those are all democratic things with people coming together. I believe that's the whole anecdote for how we are going to get out of this mess that we're in. And so, you know, as an Iowan, I obviously have some bias there. I have worked many a caucus. And I hope that for our democracy's sake, we figure out ways to keep having those opportunities for folks and we don't eliminate them in this process. I would like Iowa to be one of the set of early states. I don't know if that's going to continue. What was the second, third, fourth question, Steve?
It was really all just one. It was the role of Iowa going forward, and I think you've answered it. Thank you. But there is a question then, what happens on the Republican side? And I'll go to the former chairman on this. If the Democrats pull Iowa away, which seems pretty likely, what happens on the Republican side? Does Iowa go first? Are there any changes in the calendar that accompany the Democrats, or what would be the outcome?
Yeah, thank you. So I had to address this issue my first year as chairman. We had been charged by the convention in 2008 to take a review of our primary system, which would be actualized in 2012. So one of the things that people forget or didn't realize that up until 2012, the Republicans had out of the box Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina. The Democrats had Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. So I called Tim Kaine, then chairman of the DNC, and said, "Hey, why don't we have a conversation about how we can, you know, marry up?" Because it created all kinds of crazy pressures on the system, financially and politically and otherwise, to have this sort of fourth state kind of hanging out there by itself. Republicans didn't do anything. So we added Nevada in 2012. But that then opened up the door for me as national chairman to put in front of the body a few proposals, which included eliminating the primary system as a whole. Because it's not constitutionally mandated, it is not required. The system is less than 100 years old. And I found that the primary system is part and parcel of the polarization that occurs in our body politic, because it plays to extremes. Candidates play to a small set of constituencies and not much beyond that. So the party looked at me like I had four heads and said no. So then I said, well, if we do that, then why don't we, because with all due respect, I don't know why we start with the whitest state in the country to set the parameters for who's going to be the next president of the United States. And this idea that if you fail in Iowa, you're done, for me, it's just utter BS. And it speaks to how the system has condensed in on itself and refuses to acknowledge the full breadth of what it takes to be president. We run presidents in the battleground states of the United States, not all 50 states. If you're Maryland, strong Democratic state, we don't get the presidential nominee coming to our state. If a Republican presidential candidate doesn't come to Maryland, except for one trip to get as much cash as he can get, and he's gone. So he's not doing retail politics. He's not going to our state fairs. He's not spending time with our constituents, right? So this idea that this system is now condensed in on itself needs to be reviewed, in my view. I know a lot of traditional politicos are like, oh, God, you can't do that. Yeah, you can. You really can. There are any number of ways in which I think Republicans, particularly as the electoral map will change. I've been on record now for almost 20 years, and I will stick to this point. The next newest and most dangerous battleground states for Republicans is Texas. It is not Florida. Florida, God bless, that's passé. Florida's red, done, gone, right? Texas is the new battleground state. Democrats have made enormous gains in the state of Texas. Not so much statewide, but it's, as you know, right? It's about building up the pressure in the system. So the electoral system itself is going to change how we look at electoral politics in primary systems. And the success that Democrats are having in places like Texas, I think will go a long way to helping to reshape that primary landscape, because the day that Texas becomes a battleground and Democrats are competitive, there's no number of combinations of states where Republicans get the presidency. We can win Florida, Iowa, Nevada, Pennsylvania. The math doesn't work without Texas. And so I think we're going to see the demographics and the politics merge in a way that forces the issue. Just as the math did for Iowa in the last cycle, where everyone is now going, well, that was dumb, right? That didn't work out so nicely. Let's rethink it. I think you're going to see the same thing happen in the primary system, at least I hope it does, in the primary system as a whole, because the way the system is right now, it plays to the lowest common denominator. The extremes have the loudest voice and gets the most play. And rank and file citizens check out of the system because they don't see that they have a role to play in it. And, you know, we don't. So I'd like the idea of a national primary day personally, but I know people have an issue with that. But hell, if November you do a national election, we don't do that in cycles. So, you know, there are ways, my point is, there are ways in which we can look at our electoral system creatively where the American people actually feel that they're invested in it, as opposed to being forced.
Something. So speaking of the lowest common denominator, it brings us back to Donald Trump. Jerrod, I wanted to ask you, there are a number of Republicans who seem to be making noise, including your former boss, about running in 2024 against Trump. Who do you think actually will step up and do it, and who do you think is more likely to step aside?
Yeah, I think, you know, if you look at what my former boss Mike Pence is doing, he's definitely leaning in. He has a book that just came out. He's been speaking out a lot more, and so I think all the signs are there that he's leaning in that direction. You know, Ron DeSantis had about as good of a night as a Republican could have had at the midterms. And I think if you look at recency, Chris Christie and others, I mean, the lesson learned is certainly on the Republican side is, you know, don't pass up when it's your time. And I know that that's kind of a cliche, but, you know, this definitely seems like it's, you know, the time if Ron DeSantis wants to win. The other thing I would say is, you know, outside of Donald Trump, it was very much, you know, a almost two-step process of how you became the Republican nominee. You ran, you did really well, but you know, proved yourself, and then you got it the next time. I do see, you know, even if Ron DeSantis gets in, doesn't get in, I mean, this is the time for him to really introduce himself to that national stage. And I mean, I do think, I mean, we've talked about this a little on the panel. I mean, you look at the good headlines that came out for the Republican side of making inroads in the Hispanic community and just across the board, flipping Miami-Dade. I mean, that's the kind of thing we want to replicate and do on the national level. And right now, the person who can tell that story is Ron DeSantis. I think others. I mean, those are the ones that jump out the most. There's a lot of people who were Trump officials. Folks like Nikki Haley and Pompeo. I don't know if they ultimately get in. They've kind of tiptoed around it, but also have said, I'm not going to get in if Trump is in. Tim Scott and Rick Scott, for that matter, both senators who have done a lot on the national stage and a lot of attention. I could see them wading in as well. I mean, those are the ones that jump out to me. But like I said before, I mean that's a crowded field. So guess who that helps.
Just a quick follow-up. Since you've been around probably the president as much or more than anybody here, the former president, if somebody were to beat Donald Trump fair and square in the Republican nominating contest, would he then go out and do to them what he did to O'Day in Colorado and make sure that they can't win the general election by trashing them every single day?
So I'll let Jonathan answer that. I guess the thing that I thought about, because somebody asked a similar, would he run as an independent or something like that? If Donald Trump does not win the Republican primary, then you're looking at kind of a sea change in the Republican Party. And so I don't, I guess all bets are off at that point. And so it's hard, it's obviously, I can't predict what he does, but I mean, it would be a sea change in the Republican Party. I mean, Donald Trump controls state parties. He controls I mean, so that we would be living in a completely different world. And the thing, just a real quick, like, we could be living in a completely different world. I mean, you look at the last couple big election cycles. I mean, COVID completely changed the landscape of that 2020 election. Dobbs changed a big chunk of the landscape in this past election. So something could happen that completely changes the landscape 2 years from now.
I think the key for a non-Trump to get some momentum coming out of this midterm was the Republicans had to have a mediocre to bad midterm, and they did. So if you are a person in this country that wants to move on from the Trump era, this was the best possible midterm scenario, because it gave the Republican Party an opening to say it's enough's enough, and to expose what is actually, ironically, Trump's Achilles heel, which is that he's a loser. And look, the Republican Party is willing to tolerate a lot with Donald Trump. The last 7.5 years proved that. Any number of things he's done and said, breaking of norms, the most egregious kind of race baiting you can imagine. But they're not willing to tolerate losing, because the whole point of a political party is to win elections. It's the one sin that they will not forgive. And I think that's the biggest opportunity, is the fact that you can now paint him as a loser. Doesn't mean you're going to deny him the nomination, doesn't mean he still couldn't be as strong, but I think this is the opportunity, and that is the one issue that I think you can use against him, that he's a loser. Now the question is, so what's the alternative? I don't think the party is going to revert to a sort of George W. Bush style compassionate conservatism, to say the least. The question is, does it want basically Trump light, which I think probably gets you DeSantis. I think the organizing principle of the Republican Party right now is the clenched fist. It's not policy, it's not a platform, it's not a school of thought, it's pugilism. We hit the other side. And Trump obviously offered that, and I think if that's what you want, but you don't want Trump because you don't want to lose, then I think he's the best possible candidate. I think if the party has any sort of reckoning, any sort of soul searching, maybe other people will come online, perhaps a Pence, perhaps a Youngkin. But to me right now, given where the party is, if they don't want Trump, but they want to kind of retain that DNA, I think that DeSantis makes a lot of sense. That said, Steve, these campaigns are not won the week after the midterm. They're won over months and months and months of campaigning and trial. And we'll see if DeSantis is more Scott Walker or Barack Obama politically.
So the Republicans had a really bad night on election night by any measure, and a lot of people are blaming Trump. But Democrats are still sort of left with a president with a 42% approval rating, which doesn't really bode well for a reelection campaign if he decides to run. So JoDee, I wanted to ask you, let's assume for a second that President Biden does not run. How do you see the Democratic field shaping up? Can Kamala wrap it up because she's, the heir apparent? Would there be a primary? Would she ultimately be successful, do you think? And who are some of the other players you'd be watching?
Thank you, I think, Steve. So I did want to just comment one thing about Biden, because I actually think he's going to run. Just thinking about his history, even going back to when he first won his Senate election and his family was in that horrible accident, and a handful of senators, my memory is Ted Kennedy was one of them, but a handful of senators went to him and said, we really need you to serve, we'll support you, we'll do this, and he made that choice. And even, I don't think he was enthusiastically running for president at the beginning, personally, himself. He said in interviews, his grandkids talked to him and said, you really need to do this. His son Beau had talked to him about it. And so I do think, and it's so contrary to what you see in Donald Trump, I do think he has an immense idea around duty. And so I think he's going to end up doing it, because even if his numbers are bad, he's going to be like, well, will numbers be great for a different Democrat in this moment in time? And I've already beaten Donald Trump once, and if that's what needs to happen here, then I'll probably do it. Now, having said that, I'll go to the question that you asked. I actually think there's a pretty deep bench of Democrats, and I think that's one of the advantages of having a robust primary season where you have a lot of folks run and they build out their national, efforts. I think the vice president has a leg up, but I don't think Democrats are going to say you just get it handed to you. I don't think that's how it would go. But obviously she would run, but there will be a lot of other folks. I mean, I think, some of the folks that ran before, but you have, Secretary Pete Buttigieg, you have Amy Klobuchar, Senator, she has to decide right now, unless Minnesota changes their law about running for two things at the same time. But you have those folks, but then you also have Gretchen Whitmer, who just ran a great race in Michigan, and she really has found her stride. And I think that's the other thing. It's like we as Democrats need a primary season for folks to get up to speed to win in this crazy time. And so I think it's healthy to have it. And I also think that Kamala Harris has a leg up as being the vice president.
Michael Steele. JoDee just mentioned a number of people, if the president decided not to run, who would probably be running. I would add Gavin Newsom and maybe Pritzker to that list. Which of those people do you think would be the most difficult for Republicans to beat? Or
Wow.
is there another Democrat who you think would be the strongest candidate if Joe Biden did not run?
It's a good question.
Do you want to phone a friend?
Yeah, right. Well, I think honestly, that I outside of Donald Trump, I think it would be very hard for a Democrat to beat any of the Republicans that have been named.
I think it would be a much bigger challenge than people may realize. There is at a core level the kind of appeal that someone like Ron DeSantis would have. And I think it really speaks to what Aaron's mentioned about the Hispanic vote in a state like Florida, watching what that did. Now, again, to J. Mark's point, this is not going to get resolved in a week or 2 weeks.
It's something that happens over the next few months and how these candidates come out and how they roll out. I think, though, a strong candidate would be someone like Gretchen Whitmer, who has been tried and true, not just in the battles of campaign, but just in trying to hold the damn office. I mean, they wanted to kidnap the woman and kill her. And I think she can speak to the idea of, democratic principles in a way that a lot of the other candidates probably could not. And that will have some resonance, probably a lot of resonance with center-right voters. But I think right now, the Democrats' bench is an emerging bench. And, you look at Governor-elect Shapiro of Pennsylvania, who I think he's a very attractive candidate. I think he's got that kind of appeal, and winning in a state like Pennsylvania, I think speaks in really broad strokes about what he possibly could do outside of Pennsylvania, how he would carry himself. He reminds me of former Governor Daniels from Indiana, who had that kind of appeal as a Republican with Democrats, this sort of kind of cross appeal. But I think right now it would be a tougher call. If Democrats had someone other than Trump and to go up against, and Republicans had someone other than Biden to go up against, it would be the country would have to say, give me a moment. Let me figure it out. Because I think right now we have been so locked in. I mean, like, we're sitting here now counting down, essentially, to Trump's announcement. I mean, come on, seriously. That's where we are. And so somehow someone has got to help us break that cycle where we just don't give a damn what Donald Trump says, does, or thinks, period. And until we do, I think we're just kind of in this, we're always going to be comparing. Oh, so is DeSantis Trump light, or is, someone, and so I think we're kind of in this space right now where one of these other candidates, whether it is a Gretchen Whitmer or, a Larry Hogan or someone like that, kind of cuts through all of this and sort of resets the table politically for us.
Jonathan, Jerrod, do you guys have a view on who, if President Biden did not run, who the strongest Democrat?
I think there'll be a robust primary. I think the VP would certainly have some structural advantages at the start, but I mean, I think there's deep doubts about her viability in a primary, let alone a general election among a lot of Democrats today. And I think it would be an open question as to whether or not Biden would even endorse his VP. I don't think it's a sure thing. I think there'd be pressure on him to do it. I'm not sure he would do that. I think you have to look at the ranks of governors, you have to look at senators, cabinet members. But to me, Steve, the big question first is who can get nominated, right? There's a lot of Democrats out there. I think Michael mentioned this next generation. I think we shouldn't overlook some of the people who were just elected or reelected last week. But the key to democratic politics is you have to be able to appeal to black voters in a primary. Just the modern history of Democratic primaries, you can tell who's going to win the nomination by who has got that ability. The only Democratic nominee in the last half century who was the preferred candidate of upscale white liberals was Barack Obama, because he had a coalition that included black voters and upscale white liberals that nobody else had ever put together, because he was Barack Obama. Besides that, though, that's always how these primaries work. So to me, the key question is who can go into South Carolina and who can go into, let's say that Michigan replaces Iowa, who can go into Michigan and win over African Americans. And I think that, Steve, that narrows the list pretty significantly. And I think that gets to the heart of who is and is not going to be viable. To me, what the old GOP establishment was is what black voters are today for for Dems.
No, the only thing to add is that, I mean, I look at the map in the general too, and we've been touching on it a little bit, but I do think that that upper Midwest of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, I mean, obviously Pennsylvania and Michigan went heavy for the Dems this past time. Wisconsin, kind of a ticket split there, very close, but I think the battleground in the general is kind of those two pockets of that upper Midwest swing, and then you got to go look at the Southwest of Nevada and Arizona. And so whichever party can put a nominee forth that can win in those two areas, I think is the key as you look at the nominating process.
One name that hasn't been mentioned by anybody yet today, I'm going to mention it now. Has anybody noticed that Doug Schoen is out wandering around doing polling, ostensibly to demonstrate that Hillary might be a really good candidate in the future at some point? JoDee, do you think there's any way that Hillary Clinton would consider running again?
If y'all are going to sleep, Steve, now walk down the crowd.
Let's make some news here.
I adore Hillary Clinton. And I don't think she's going to run. I think the lessons that she took from the last time were deep and painful, and I don't think she would choose to do it again. That's what I think. But, I'm also, remember, starting from a place where I think Biden is going to run, so I haven't had to go there. I can tell you personally, if she ran and lost again, I'm not sure I could take it. I would have to retire from politics. So for my own salvation and viability, I think, but I adore her, and I'm so grateful for a lot of the things she has done for the country in her service and coming back and being Secretary of State. But I don't think she's going to do it.
Steve, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
I think we've got to come to terms with the fact that Biden is more likely to run than not run. But a Democrat communicator, what should Biden say when he's asked the question of, okay, so will you commit to serving a full second term? Because that's going to be the first question that comes up if Biden does run is, will you commit to serve your full second term? At which point?
The answer is always the same, yes. I mean, and frankly, it's a debate question that every candidate who's ambitious has to answer.
Just say yes and figure it out later.
Just say yes and figure it out later. Absolutely. Question, I intend to, and yes. So question for you, Jonathan. It was raised in the last panel, this notion that, the coverage of Donald Trump was obsessive in the last campaign to the point where the podium would be on camera for 20 minutes before he showed up in 16, while his plane was landing. More recent.
Yeah, indefensible.
Frankly, we're pretty newsworthy that the media.
Yeah.
He's currently not on Twitter. He says he's not going to go back. What's going to happen now? Will the media give this kind of coverage going forward that it was giving in 2016?
He's not going to get, I don't think, the 2016 open mic treatment that he was basically given. But look, if we're being totally honest here today, I think it's pretty clear that the press corps is still not figured out how to cover Donald Trump. Look, it's very difficult, right? Because it's not a philanthropy. It's not a charity. Like, the press is in business to, run a profit, right? And so you want to offer people content that is important and newsworthy, but also that, like, they want to watch or read. And obviously, the numbers don't lie about Donald Trump, right? And I think Trump himself says this out loud, that they need me and they miss me. I do think that there'll be more restraint this time than in 16. It was such a novelty in 16, and there was almost this arms race between the networks about giving him more attention. I think and obviously I'm a print snob, but I think the print media was more restrained. in 16 and trying to sort of juggle this. I think the TV was very different. I mean, him calling into television shows willy-nilly, airing every rally, the podium itself, it was an enormous in-kind contribution in the primary. There's no question about it. So I think it will be different this time around. But Steve, you can't deny the newsworthiness. He is the biggest force in American politics, and he's not even the president. We just had a midterm election in which the former president was as significant an atmospheric force as the current president. And here we are in Greece, you look, all over Europe. You talk to people, in politics or government or business, and they want to know, right? Is Trump coming back? Like, what's happened to the U.S.? It's the biggest question there is. But Biden tells this story that when he went to his first G7, and God love Biden, he blurted out who it was. Biden said, he was talking to a foreign leader, it happened to be Emmanuel Macron, and Biden said, guys, America is back. And Macron said, yeah, for how long? And so I guess I say all that, Steve, because the coverage, I think, at some level of Trump is justified. Doesn't excuse giving him an open mic, but obviously it's a seismic global story, the would-be return of this hugely controversial, polarizing, and frankly demagogic former president.
Speaking of open mic, it's a great transition. Does anybody here have any questions for our august panel? Eugene, you probably should come to a microphone so that people... Here it comes.
I'll keep this. I have a big voice, I'll just do this. JoDee and Steve, on the Democratic side, and J-Mark talked a little bit about the black vote. And it feels like often you have liberals, white liberals in the party get really excited about certain people. They're getting really excited about certain people, name some of them. Is there like a fundamental misunderstanding to this day in the Democratic Party who the base of the party is? I think often when people talk about the base of the party, they think of young folks, they think of liberals that are on Twitter, but really the base of the party are black women, older black women living in South Carolina. So I guess I'm just curious on how you see that shaping the party.
Well, I'm really glad you asked that, Eugene, because I've been thinking about the three amazing women who ran statewide, and regrettably none of them won, black women. So you had Val Demings, you had Sherry Beasley, and you had Stacey Abrams. And that I think in terms of, statewide, black women leading in that way, we're going to see that change soon. Those states are all really tough states to run in, but hopefully there's going to be enough change that we see one of them get elected. Each in their own right were extraordinary. And I believe that they're going to continue. Stacey already has set up Fair Fight, which is something she set up after she lost last time. And I believe she will continue to be a force, and so I didn't want to miss that. I know you're asking more about individual voters and community, and I do think that there's particularly black women are looking around going, so I show up all the time, and what are you all up to, right? What's going on around here? And I think we will hear more of that voice and folks looking to that, and I think in part Obama was very helpful in having a different coalition and different community come together for his election. But I think it's even a little different than that in terms of what we can see happen in the future. And I certainly hope that we're able to get there. I think when you think about this next generation, and this is where I also go to my current seat around working in LGBTQ advocacy, is our coalition of youth are more diverse, the folks who support equality. It's a very diverse group, and it's growing. And I think that coalition of folks is also going to start influencing this next couple of rounds of elections in ways that we couldn't have imagined. So almost it's like, it's sort of like the older black women going, man, where am I going to pass this baton? And maybe it is to some of this next generation of youth who see some things the way they see them too, in terms of how they want the world, to be different. And so I'm hopeful on that front. And frankly, I think the other piece is the dialogue has to start much, much earlier than like in August and September. This has to be an ongoing dialogue that happens with candidates, and I do think the primary season offers that for Democrats to have that happen, but they have to be very intentional about it.
So just to build on that, I agree with everything JoDee just said, but anybody who's been paying attention in particular to presidential politics on the Democratic side understands full well what Jonathan said, which is that the black vote is the Democratic establishment. And whether it was Barack Obama beat Hillary Clinton because of black voters in South Carolina, Joe Biden became the nominee because of black voters in South Carolina. When I was doing the Howard Dean campaign, our strategy was for him to go get every black endorsement that he could get, because we knew that a white guy from Vermont, which is an all-white state, was going to have a tough time once we got past Iowa and New Hampshire, assuming we did. And we were ready. I mean, we were fully loaded. But the Democratic nomination has been decided by black voters, going all the way back, at least as far as Obama, and probably beyond that as well. I wasn't paying as close attention back in the day, but you're absolutely right. And it is your grandmother.
I mean, mine helped me hard in '84 because of
Yep. Anybody else have a question?
And by the way, the primaries are interesting because I think it was really captured who's viable and who's not. I mean, we haven't mentioned Raphael Warnock yet, but I think if he wins the runoff, you have now won back-to-back statewide elections in Georgia. You have to be the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. And that's going to put you into contention. I mean, he's going to be a player.
Lynn.
I'm kind of tying this in with one of the Pat Agen comments about maybe we need fewer elections or less thinking about. I mean, we all love this stuff, right? And here we are, a couple of days after the primary, already game boarding what's going to happen in 24. We're a unique subset, I think, of Americans. And when I heard you say, of course tonight my primate, but that 23 is going to be sort of a blow your mind year, I'm almost feeling sorry for the American electorate at this point about me needing fewer elections a la Pat and therapy a la Doug. But I'm just trying to think through, and I know it's hard to say, but I'm trying to think through the general public's view when they start seeing this explode in front of them again. Like, didn't we just do all this? And now you're asking us to sort of get our minds ready. Yeah, it's always good to say it could be Israel, right? And maybe just on that. No, I don't know any, but I think it's interesting for us to think about the non-experts out there who are probably going to be under the covers as soon as some of this starts. But we're not under the covers, so.
We're not. And we are just about, I'm sorry, did you want to add something? Go ahead.
Comment. So Lynn, I think where most of those folks are going to be is at their kids' softball game or baseball game or soccer game, or they're going to be taking care of their parents, or, that's where they're going to be, or trying to, save some cash for buying a house or sending a kid to college. So they're going to be living their lives. And I think most folks do not want our democracy to be a damn circus. And so I think they'll shut it all. I think they'll shut a fair amount of it off. And the folks we need to engage are those folks. We need more of them to engage in their communities and in democracy. And so if we can get some of this to not be a crazy circus, and they have an understanding that these policies and these people can impact their day-to-day lives, hopefully in positive ways, that they would engage. But boy, if it's a circus, they'll shut it off.
So it's 3:33. I think the schedule. Pardon?
You can close it up, Steve.
Well, we have 2 minutes left. If anybody has a question, we have 2 minutes left.
It's a wrap, McMahon.
We have 2 minutes left. Okay. Going once, going twice. Thank you, panel. It was a great.
It's a great run.
Just real quick, I came across, because I love everybody in this room, and we're all in this space for a reason, but I wanted to share a quote to set us all off with real quick. This was from President Ulysses S. Grant when he was addressing a group of Civil War soldiers in 1875. And he said that he predicted the dividing line in the nation's next great conflict will not be Masons or Dixons, but between patriotism and intelligence on the one side, and superstition, ambition, and ignorance on the other. And I think that our gatherings are an opportunity for us to not only reflect on those words, but then project back in the work that we do for democracy. Why it's so important that we, in every effort we make, defeat ambition and ignorance with patriotism and intelligence. So I just wanted to
You're here.